It's 2011 and it's my first year in secondary school. And, you know, before that, don't mean to flex, but I was a pretty energetic kid. Some people will say that this is all because of puberty, and fair enough, but like I said, this is just what I think and my own opinion and, my own experience. And, whenever I was in secondary school for the first time in my first year, my classmates, I hear all the boys basically talking about, this certain website that you can go on and, you can watch naked girls and you can watch people, you can watch people doing it. And, whenever you hear that for the first time, whenever you're young, it's like, it's a completely new thing that is just, that you didn't think that you could ever see. A few weeks go by and I hear my classmates pretty much talking about this all the time and talking about like how they've discovered this website and they've discovered, what you can do pretty much whenever, you do watch these type of videos. I remember going home myself and I remember looking it up, and after 10 seconds of watching, after 10 seconds of clicking into the website, my brain, I was amazed. I was genuinely like blown away by like what you could watch and the access that you have to just watching this sort of stuff. And that there was categories, there was, it was like Facebook, it was like going onto the internet for the first time or going onto Facebook for the first time. You're just kind of like, this is incredible, this stuff exists, and it was exciting, and but it was also intimidating, because I remember talking to, a few of my friends basically being like, do you just watch this stuff all the time? And I remember them basically saying, well, no, that's not what you really do. And I would hear, people around the school pretty much talking about like, fapping, as it's called now, or what you can do whenever you watch these videos. And look, I get it. You may watch this and think this all this shit is cringe as fuck, but like frankly, I don't care. This is just my experience, and at the end of the day, if this can help you out and make you understand the dangers of this sort of stuff, and it helps you steer away to a different path, then I'm happy, and that's why I don't care if you find this cringe or not. So yeah. So after hearing about all the stuff that you can do pretty much once you watch these sort of videos on the hub, I went home and tried it. And after I did it for the first time, I can't remember it because obviously it was so long ago, but I do remember around that certain moment of time where it was like a whole new world that just opened up to me. This like level of pleasure that you can get for just doing nothing, for just sitting in your room for a few minutes, well in that case 10 seconds. It was incredible to see this sort of stuff for the first time anyway, and I was addicted. I was immediately hooked. And because I was 11 years old, like I said, for the first time, it completely blew my mind. And it completely rewired my brain in such a short amount of time. And this was around the time whenever, over in the UK, whenever you can go off for the summer holidays, and you're off for a few months before you have to go back to school again in the winter. And I remember leaving school, and I remember coming into school the last 1 or 2 weeks before I obviously had the summer holidays, and like I would just look at girls my age and was immediately like, I started getting like lustful around these women. And like I said, that could have all just been a part of going through puberty, but again, I beg to differ. Instead of just doing it over videos, I was doing it over videos, and I was doing it over, some of the girls that were in my class that I found attractive. And again, I don't mean to flex, but before I started, before I started watching this sort of stuff, I was a pretty confident kid. I didn't have that sort of thought in my head about what other people thought about me. life was just so enjoyable back then. You know, you had that sort of childish energy that we all used to have. And for me, you know, I brought that into secondary school, where to the point I had this sort of level of confidence where I attracted one of the best looking girls in the entire school who was interested in me. Now, of course, I was a bit nervous because you've never really done any of that before, you don't really know what to do. But because this is around the time I started watching porn, it hit me like a truck. And I went on the summer holidays in school after my first year, and that's all I was doing. You know, every day, 3-4 times a day, and that was genuinely the average amount of times that I did it. Minimum was 4 times a day. Sometimes I did 5-6 times a day, and I was doing this flat out for 3-4 months as a kid, you know. And I never really knew the effect that it really had until the next time I was going back into school, where it was September. And again, one of the biggest things that I realized is because I was doing it that much over the summer holidays, pretty much every girl that I used to be able to talk to couldn't talk to any girls. I just had this like absolute smack in the face of confidence loss, and I lost all my confidence. You know, I started getting like crazy anxiety. And I remember, and I'll never forget this, I remember one of my classmates coming up to me, one of my mates, and he says to me, "You've changed." And that hit me, bro. Like, I was just like, holy shit. Like, I really went from somebody who was, you know, one of the most confident in the class, to then being, you know, the quiet kid in the corner, all in a matter of a few months' time. And it only got worse until then, you know. All I ever did was just lust over women. That was the only thing that was in my head. You know, previously, before I started being introduced to this sort of stuff, I used to be so motivated. I used to think about, you know, all the stuff I wanted to do in life. And I'll never forget this. I remember I used to spend hours wanting to like think about all the YouTube videos I wanted to make, because back then YouTube was starting to become pretty popular. It was only in its early stages. And I remember watching all these YouTubers, like the Yogscast, who were Minecraft YouTubers back in the day. And I remember like just really wanting to do that. And I used to obsess over it for hours, thinking about all the thumbnails and all the videos I wanted to make. And, you know, I was so motivated to achieve these goals that I wanted to do at a young age. And I wanted to become a footballer. At the time, I was training to become a footballer, and I played for a team. And I was good, you know, I was actually really good at it. And one of the reasons I was so good at it was because of the fact is that I was a confident kid back then. But after being introduced to Korn, everything just like started to get worse. In my second year, I struggled with girls because I kept pedestalizing them. I kept putting them on a pedestal because I kept lusting over them so hard. And I couldn't talk to them. I couldn't even make eye contact with them. And in such a short amount of time, like I said, I went from being right at the top to right at the very bottom. And it affected my football as well. Like, all of us, do you ever get that feeling, bro, where you feel like everybody's watching you, but nobody is? You feel like everybody's looking at you and everybody's judging you, whenever pretty much nobody is, and everybody's just getting on with their lives. But that's the way I felt round then. And you can only imagine how that would affect things, you know, especially as a young kid at 12 years old at this point. You know, I would turn up to football practice and I'd be terrible, because I'd think to myself that, you know, I'm being so critically judged and people are looking at me, and I felt so ashamed of myself for no reason. And straight into second year and third year and fourth year, it only got worse, you know. I started getting made fun of. I started getting like pretty much categorized as the quiet kid, as one of them sort of people in school who no one really spoke to. You know, I only had a few friends here and there, but, you know, I was never bullied to an extent. But whenever you're in an environment around children like that, you can only imagine like how worse it makes you feel whenever you're someone who watches porn, and when you have people like in school, how ruthless, especially secondary school is. If you're in secondary school or you've just left secondary school, you know what I mean. It is brutal. You know, people just don't hold back, you know. I was never, you know, around the time it was sort of like normal for you to watch it. I remember everyone in school, pretty much all the boys were basically like making jokes and cracking jokes about watching it and saying how many times they did it and all this here. But I was, you know, and I was one of the ones as well who was like that. You know, I would joke about it, I'd laugh about it, but deep down inside, I was ashamed of it. Didn't know why. I didn't know I was ashamed of it until later on in life. But I had this level of shame that I just wasn't aware of. And, you know, in school as well, I couldn't concentrate. I started making decisions that started altering the trajectory of my school life. I started getting worse, bad grades. I started just pretty much feeling more stupid, even though I knew it wasn't. But I just couldn't focus. All my mind ever was thinking about was girls, wanting a girlfriend. But then whenever some girl would make eye contact with me, I would look away immediately, and I'd feel like shit. And I'd have this internal punishment towards myself all the time because of how bad I was and how much I sucked with girls, but not knowing what was the real thing that was holding me back. And this continued on, you know, and one of the things is, this is where it gets a little personal, even more personal, is I started getting laughed at for being called a frigid. Now, for anyone who's watching this who doesn't know what a frigid is, this is like old school slang from back in the day. A frigid means you're somebody who's never kissed a girl. And I went through my whole secondary school year. I went through all of secondary school basically being laughed at and made fun of because I never kissed a girl. You know, the majority of fellas my age who, you know, were normal people all had girlfriends. They've all been in relationships. And so I had this enormous pressure to get those things and want those things because I wanted to fit in with that crowd of people, but I just couldn't do it. And because of that, I hated myself. My self-esteem went off a cliff. Like, I started feeling really uncomfortable in my own skin, pretty much because I felt like I didn't fit in with other people because they all had certain things that I wanted, like girlfriends, and they were attracting women, and I wanted those things, but like I said, I just didn't have the confidence or the courage to be able to actually ask a girl out or even talk to a girl. And I knew myself, if I couldn't talk to a girl, how the hell was I ever going to get in a relationship with one? I used to have a youth club. I used to join a youth club where it was just a sort of community of people who would go after school and hang out and play pool and play a bit of football. And I loved it, you know. Whenever I first joined, I was, you know, loving life. But whenever I started watching porn all the time and fapping, all of a sudden things started to get worse, really, really, really bad. Again, similar sort of thing. I just felt like I just couldn't talk to people. I felt like I was never inside I always felt like I was watching myself, like I was judging myself through every conversation I was having with someone, being so afraid that they would find me like nervous or not know that I can't talk to people or I can't socialize. I started becoming very unsocial, and it only got worse because, you know, there was a time I was in playing football one time, and I'll never forget this. I was playing football, and pretty much everybody, there must have been about 50 people in this community, and we were all playing football, and I was waiting on the side to come on. And next thing, this fella comes up behind me and he pulls down my trousers. You know, but the problem was he only intended to obviously just pull the trousers down and not the pants behind it. And he bagged me. He completely, but the pants came down as well with it. And, you know, I can't believe I'm saying that this sort of story, but I just believe it is completely necessary to really drive it home for some people, to really help some people out there. But yeah, like, everybody seen everything on show and started laughing, and that just made it worse. And I never went back to that community ever again, and a few people from that community were part of my school. So even going into school the next few days, it was absolute hell, because I knew what those people were thinking, and you could see them laughing and cracking jokes and stuff like that there, and you can only imagine what that does to somebody's self-esteem. And I would cope with it by going home and getting that instant hit of pleasure, because it was so easy to access. And in the space of a few years, I went from somebody who was, the confident kid who found it easy making friends, found it easy attracting women, to pretty much being a shell of that, and being the complete opposite of that person in only a matter of years, because I got addicted to this website that, like I said, was just such an easy coping mechanism to just fix all my problems. And all it ever did was long term was just make me feel horrible, and because of that low self-esteem, and it made everything in my life worse. It was bad, and I only realised that I wanted to do something about it, and that it was bad, whenever I was 18, and I discovered self-improvement for the first time. And it wasn't really self-improvement back then, it was more separate. It wasn't all like bundled together like self-improvement. It was just kind of like, how to get in shape, and NoFap community. They're all different communities and different videos on YouTube at the time. And I remember watching all these videos about pretty much wanting to stop, on the effects of porn, and like the effects it has on your mind. And I felt so ashamed of myself because I've been doing this for years, and that was the core root of the problem. Was the fact is that the reason why most of my childhood became, basically fell off a cliff, was simply just because I was going home and watching porn. And again, at this time, I was 18, I was a virgin, and I still never kissed a girl, never had any intimacy with a girl before in my life. And I really, really started to fall into a really deep depression because of it, because I thought this is never going to be, I'm never going to, nothing's ever going to get better from this. I remember discovering all these videos about NoFap and trying to quit, and I remember I actually started, and I was, whenever you're watching NoFap videos and you get really motivated to stop and to quit, I was so excited, because I realized this is the problem and I'm going to fix it, and then my life is going to get better because of this. I remember relapsing after relapsing after relapsing, and I'd always see these videos about people who have gone 1,000, 2,000 days without touching it, and again, that sort of made things worse. It made me feel even more ashamed of myself, because I was like, well, how are these people being able to do it but I can't, And again, this sort of self-punishment that I kept giving myself, because I kept messing up, and I always believed that it shouldn't be something that I should be messing up. This should be easy. There was one time me and my friend were in Belfast, and my mate was the complete opposite of who I was. He was really good at attracting women. He didn't have a care in the world, and he was kind of like the polar opposite of me at the time. And I remember this was just during lockdown, there was periods during lockdown where things would open up again for a few weeks, and you were allowed to travel and you were allowed to go places for a while before obviously things shut down again. And it was during one of these times where I got lucky. So we're out in Belfast, in the town, and we're waiting outside a nightclub, and we must have been waiting there for 3 hours. And I remember me and my mate were sitting talking and just having a conversation, and these two girls in front of us, two absolutely beautiful women, were standing in front of us waiting in line, and they kept turning around and smiling and looking at us and joining in our conversation the odd time. And they kept doing it to the point where they pretty much were a part of our group. They were talking away to us pretty much the whole time we were waiting. And we ended up joining their table, and we're all talking away, laughing, and we all have alcohol in us, so like I said, we don't have a care in the world, and things were going well. And we were only in there for an hour because we were waiting for 3 hours to get into the place in the first place, but we were only in there for about an hour before we had to leave. And so we leave and we get a pizza, we walk back, and I notice that they pretty much are coming with us back to our hotel. And my heart is absolutely racing. I'm not joking. I know where this is going, and I know what's about to happen. And so I'm already thinking about what's going to happen once we're there. And my heart is absolutely racing. I am shit. The previous night before, I was watching porn. And so, like I said, this shit wasn't doing me any favours. So we race back to the hotel room and we're sitting in there, me and my friend, with these two girls. And like I said, with him, it's absolutely no problem. He takes one of them and goes into the bathroom, and honest to God, I don't know what they're doing, but I think I have a good idea. I think you do as well. And I'm sitting in the room with possibly the best looking one out of the two of them. And she's sitting on her phone, and even me saying this story now is hard to say because of how embarrassing it is. But I don't know, I froze. I didn't know what to do, because I was so scared of making a move in case it actually worked. Not if I got rejected, but in case it actually worked, because I just didn't know what to do. And I was afraid of somebody like that looking at me, not knowing what I was doing. Next thing you know, seconds turn into minutes, minutes turn into an hour. And I was sort of making a bit of small talk. She was on her phone, and the tension started getting really, really heavy. Like I just didn't know what to do. And so pretty much at the end of it all, the two of them ended up leaving. Honest to God, you can imagine how someone like that was feeling. I felt like absolute shit. I felt like that was my only chance, and that's the only chance I'll ever get, and that's it, I'm done. Like that was a chance that was given to me on a silver platter, and I blew it. It was one of the worst things that could have ever happened to me, but it was also one of the best things that could have ever happened to me. Because after that experience, it lit a fire within me to like really start to like sort this out, because this is going to keep happening over and over and over again. And it did. You know, that wasn't the first time that sort of embarrassment happened with a girl, you know. Again, I was still trying to stop and still trying to quit, and I went on a few streaks. I remember I went 90 days one time without doing it, and that felt incredible. But it didn't really mean anything, it didn't really fix anything in my life, because I was sort of just chasing a number. I was just trying to see how far I could go, but eventually I was going to relapse, you know. It was never something that was just like, that's it, like this has no control over me anymore. And I did all the things that I used to watch people say in videos that you should do, you know, like take cold showers and do push-ups and all this here sort of stuff. That didn't do anything. It was all just short-term solutions for a permanent problem. And you know, one thing that made things worse is that the world started to get more sexualized. And this is a bit controversial, but I started noticing, especially online, that like this was like during the time whenever OnlyFans started really taking off, and mainstream media was just starting to like popularize and sexualize all that sort of stuff, like women, you know, on OnlyFans and all that there, and the empowerment of women. And that just made things worse for someone who's trying to, you know, stop touching it and stop watching porn. And it did, you know, because every time you went on Instagram, all you ever got was, you know, girls in revealing clothing. You know, YouTubers like the Sidemen and all these other people on YouTube who were, you know, big YouTubers at the time were having OnlyFans girls on their YouTube videos, and they were promoting their OnlyFans, and the world really started to be getting a lot more sexualized. And like I said, that just started to make things really, really, really tough. And I remember a few other times as well. This would have been around about 2021, 2022, where I got success. You know, there was one time I was in a bar with my friend again, and we were sitting out the back of this nightclub in the beer garden. Basically what happens is these two girls who recognize one of my friends sits down at our table, and this really, really cute girl, really attractive girl, was sitting beside me. And so I was sitting talking away to her and blabbering on, and we got on like a house on fire. And next thing, one thing led to another, where I ended up going back to her house, and I felt so great. Like, I was like, oh my god, like, you know, like, I went from somebody who couldn't get girls to now I'm literally going back home with one. And I could not get it up, because I'd done it 4 times that day, and I was so up for it. Whenever I actually was there with a real girl, I couldn't do anything. Just was not working. You know, if you were to know me, I make fun of it now, but that was such a I felt so ashamed of myself again, and I noticed that this was happening multiple times, that I was, you know, getting lucky with some girls, you know, where I just couldn't follow through. I just couldn't keep it up. After these times where I started realizing that this was affecting my relationships with other people, things started to get really bad as well. I started to enjoy things less. You know, going for a walk wasn't fun. Whenever my parents would ask me out for, you know, a meal somewhere, if they were going to a restaurant, I didn't want to go. The world started to become less enjoyable and less fun with no matter what I was doing. Playing video games wasn't fun anymore. Like I said, going for an ice cream wasn't enjoyable. You know, watching films, there was nothing that I felt like was just giving me the enjoyment that it used to give me. And this is all because of watching porn. And I realized after that time that this isn't working. This whole strategy of trying to go on these streaks and trying to, you know, go 90 days and 100 days and 50 days, it wasn't working, because my whole mind was fucked. My brain was so rewired because of porn. And I wasn't actually realizing I wasn't actually understanding how to quit this thing. And the one thing that I did differently that actually worked for me, and I hope this does work for you if you're someone who's watching this video this far, is I stopped feeling ashamed of myself every time I would relapse. Because yes, I knew watching porn was bad for you, but, you know, I understood at that time that, you know, a few years ago, this would have been about 3.5, 4 years ago, where I understood that yes, porn is bad, but it's not going to take me a few months to get rid of an addiction that I've had for 8 years. So yeah, I basically, every time I got an urge, I would try and fight it. But if it was just getting to the point where it was starting to like affect me, and I was thinking about it all the time, like if I was going through my day where if I was thinking about getting an urge to relapse, and if I was thinking about that all day, then I would just relapse. Because if it meant that I could continue on with my day and do other things and get that out of the road, then I would do it and not feel ashamed of myself. And once I started doing that, I also started to do something, and this is a bit cringe, honestly, and I'll even admit this myself. This is a bit cringy, but this just worked for me. And if it means that if I can actually have freedom in life again, and I can actually have fun and enjoy life without being held back by this addiction, then it was worth it. So one of the things that I did was I tracked how many times I would relapse a week, and I realized that was a far more healthier way of actually beating this addiction, because I realized that, like I said, that this isn't something that I can just stop doing. You know, I am going to make mistakes and I am going to relapse, so I'm just going to make sure I relapse less. And that really fixed things. You know, I went from doing it 200 times a year, 300 times a year, to 100 times a year, and then 50 times a year, and then 20 times a year. And honest to God, bro, that changed my life. That completely changed everything for me. You know, I started basically having that sort of feeling of life again, where I started enjoying things. And, you know, I went from watching porn to then doing it over images of girls, to then just doing it in my mind, where I wasn't watching any sort of material and I was just thinking about it in my head. And that was so liberating, to have that feeling again, that you're no longer addicted to this thing that has destroyed your life for 8 years. And it did. And once I started like actually coming to the realization that I'm no longer addicted to this, things started getting better. I started having energy and motivation again to actually want to do things with my life. I started socializing better with people, and I started caring less. And I started going back to the being a kid again. I started, not really giving a shit about what other people thought, to an extent. And all that anxiety that I used to have and I started basically rebuilding my character and who I was as a person. And I'll never forget it, I'll never forget it, because there was a time where a year ago I had an urge to do it, right? A real heavy urge. It was bad. Like, I kept thinking about it all the time, like for hours and hours and hours, and I sort of knew that I'm gonna have to do it to just get over it, and just so I can just move on and whatever. But it went away. The urge went away because it was no longer it no longer had such a grip on me anymore, because I was so used to not doing it, that my mind was more focused on doing other things. And yes, it was in the background sometimes where I kept thinking about it, but once I would occupy myself, doing YouTube videos or meditating or do some sort of daily routine, it went away and it escaped my mind. And I remember sitting there on my balcony in my house, just looking up at the stars at night, smiling with a certain sense of pride to myself, and realizing that like I've actually conquered such a fiercely difficult addiction that we all have. We've been let down by social media, we've been let down by our parents, we've been let down by anyone else, and no one else is going to help you get out of this hole that you're in but yourself. And so I really, really, really hope, like I said, this does work for you, and you do, and you can beat this problem, because like I said, at the end of the day, it's worth it, bro. So like I said just before I go, you've got this. If you're someone who's on this journey, you've got this 100%. Don't waste your time looking back. We're not going that way.